The throne room of the Velanthi Empire stretched for nearly a mile. Crystal pillars rose toward a ceiling that glowed with soft purple light. Thousands of courtiers stood in perfect silence, their tall bodies wrapped in robes of silver and gold. At the far end of this magnificent hall sat Queen Seraphi, the Eternal, on a throne carved from a single, massive diamond. She had ruled for 3,000 years. She had seen empires rise and fall like waves upon a shore. Her people had conquered 400 star systems, and not once had they known defeat. The Velanthi were perfect. They were engineered for greatness before birth. Their warriors stood 12 feet tall with skin like polished bronze. Their minds could reach across space itself, speaking without words, crushing enemies with pure thought. Today, the Queen was being entertained. A massive holographic display floated before her throne. It showed footage from a tiny planet called Earth, a world so small and insignificant that the Velanthi had ignored it for centuries. But recently, these humans had begun expanding into space. They had built colonies on other worlds. They had formed something called the Galactic Defense Corps. The Queen watched with cold amusement as human soldiers trained on the screen. They were so small, barely 6 feet tall at most. They wore clunky mechanical armor because their bodies were too weak to survive without it. They carried weapons that used chemical explosions to fire metal projectiles. Primitive. Laughable one. Human soldier fell during an obstacle course. He hit the ground hard, and the Queen could see pain on his face. But then he pushed himself up and continued running. "Observe," the Queen said, her voice echoing through the silent hall. "They must fight against their own bodies simply to stand. They sweat. They bleed. They struggle for every small achievement." Laughter rippled through the court. Thousands of Velanthide voices joined in mockery. General Vraxis, commander of the Imperial fleets, stepped forward and bowed deeply. "My Queen, these creatures have established a colony in the Proxima system. It sits at the edge of our territory. Shall I dispatch a conquest fleet?" The Queen smiled, revealing teeth like pearls. "Send the 3rd Legion. Nothing more. I will not waste our finest warriors on such pitiful prey." "The 3rd Legion?" Vraxis seemed surprised. The 3rd Legion was made up of common soldiers, not elite fighters. "My Queen, should we not send at least you question me?" The Queen's eyes flashed with ancient power. Vraxis bowed lower. "Never, my Queen. The 3rd Legion will depart within the hour." As the general retreated, the Queen returned her attention to the holographic display. She watched humans lifting weights, running through mud, practicing combat against each other. Everything they did required effort. Everything caused them pain. They were born helpless, she knew. Human infants could not even walk for a full year after birth. They had no natural weapons, no psychic abilities, no special powers of any kind. They were, in every measurable way, inferior. "These humans will kneel before us within a single rotation of their world," the Queen announced to her court. "Mark my words. They will see our ships darken their skies, and they will surrender without a fight. What choice do they have? They are nothing." The court erupted in applause and cheers of agreement. But then a servant approached the throne with careful steps. "My Queen," he said softly, "a human ambassador has arrived. He requests an audience." Silence fell over the hall. "A human? Here." The Queen raised one elegant eyebrow. "How did this creature reach our throne world?" "He came alone, my Queen, in a small ship. He says he wishes to speak before any conflict begins." The Queen considered this for a moment. Then she smiled. "Bring him before me. Let us see what a human looks like when it begs." Minutes later, the great doors at the far end of the hall opened. Every Velanthi turned to watch as a single figure walked the long path toward the throne. The human was old by his species standards. His hair was gray, and lines marked his face. He wore a simple military uniform with medals on his chest. He walked with a slight limp, as if old injuries still troubled him. But his eyes never looked down. He stared straight ahead at the Queen as he walked, showing no fear, despite being surrounded by thousands of beings who could crush him with a thought. "Colonel," Marcus Webb stopped at the base of the throne and offered a small bow. Not deep, not submissive, just polite. "Queen Sci-Fi," he said. His voice was calm and steady. "Thank you for seeing me." The queen leaned forward on her throne. "You have 5 minutes, little creature. Speak quickly. Entertain me." "I'm not here to entertain," Webb replied. "I'm here to deliver a message from the United Earth Council. We know your fleet is coming to Proxima. We know you think we're weak. I'm here to ask you to reconsider." Laughter exploded through the hall. Even the queen chuckled softly. "Reconsider? You come to my throne world alone to tell me to reconsider conquering your pathetic colony?" She shook her head in disbelief. "Your courage is amusing, human. I will grant you that. But courage does not win wars. Power wins wars, and you have none." He did not look away. He simply nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response. "My people have a saying, Your Majesty. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog." He paused to let the words settle. "You see small bodies and primitive weapons. You see weakness. But I promise you this. If you send your ships to our colony, you will learn something about humanity that no amount of studying can teach you." The queen's smile faded slightly. "And what is that?" "That we don't know how to quit." Webb turned to leave, then stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "I hope you'll remember this conversation, Your Majesty. I truly do." He walked away without waiting for permission. The guards looked to the queen, waiting for the order to strike him down. But she raised one hand to stop them. She watched the old human limp his way back down the endless hall. Something in his voice troubled her. Not his words, exactly. Words were just sounds. But the way he spoke them, without fear, without doubt, as if he knew something she did not. The doors closed behind him. "My queen?" General Vraxis asked carefully. "Should we stop him?" The queen sat back on her throne. "No, let him go. Let him return to his people and tell them we are coming." She smiled again, but this time the smile did not reach her eyes. "His courage changes nothing. His words are empty. The humans will fall like all the others." But that night, alone in her private chambers, Queen Sci-Fi found herself unable to sleep. She kept seeing the old soldier's eyes, gray and tired, but filled with something she could not name. She dismissed the feeling as foolishness. It was a decision she would come to regret. The Velanthi fleet arrived at Proxima Centauri b on a gray morning. 12 massive warships descended through the clouds like metal gods coming to claim what was theirs. Inside those ships, 12,000 warriors prepared for what they expected to be an easy victory. General Korvax commanded the 3rd Legion. He was young by Velanthi standards, only 400 years old, and eager to prove himself. As his ship broke through the atmosphere, he looked down at the human colony called New Providence. It was not impressive. Simple buildings made of metal and concrete spread across a rocky plain. Farms dotted the surrounding hills. A few defensive walls had been built, but they looked thin and weak. The planet itself was harsh, constantly battered by electromagnetic storms that lit up the sky with purple lightning. "Pathetic," Korvax muttered. "They chose to live on this miserable rock." His second-in-command nodded. "Humans are strange creatures, General. They seem to enjoy suffering." The fleet landed 2 miles from the colony. Warriors poured out of the ships in perfect formation, their bronze skin gleaming, their psychic links humming with confidence. They expected humans to come running out waving white flags. They expected surrender. Instead, they found silence. The colony sat quiet. No movement. No sounds. The wind blew dust across empty streets. Korvax frowned. "Where are they?" "Perhaps they fled, General. Perhaps the ground exploded. Dozens of Velanthi. Warriors vanished in balls of fire as hidden mines detonated beneath their feet. Before anyone could react, gunfire erupted from 100 different positions. Bullets tore through the air. Warriors fell. Commander Zara Okonkwo watched from a hidden bunker beneath the colony. She was 42 years old with dark skin and eyes that had seen too many battles. 800 soldiers waited with her in tunnels that stretched for miles beneath the surface. tunnels the humans had dug over 10 years preparing for this day. First wave successful, her lieutenant reported. Enemy casualties estimated at 300. 300 out of 12,000? Okonkwo said calmly. We have a long way to go. Begin Phase 2. The Velanthi regrouped quickly. Korvax was furious. 300 of his warriors dead in the first minute, killed by enemies he could not even see. He ordered an advance toward the colony. His army marched forward. They were trained for direct combat, for overwhelming enemies with superior strength and psychic power. They pushed into the colony's outer streets, smashing through walls. Searching for the cowardly humans who hid from them, they found traps everywhere. Buildings collapsed on advancing squads. Hidden pits swallowed warriors whole. Explosives detonated in narrow streets, turning tight spaces into killing zones. And always, there was gunfire from positions that seemed impossible to locate. Conquer their challenges through strength alone. They adapted. They learned. They refused to stay broken. What manner of creatures are these? She whispered to herself in the darkness of her chambers. She thought about the old ambassador who had visited her throne room. Colonel Webb, with his gray hair and calm eyes and unbreakable spirit. She thought about his words. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. For 3,000 years, Queen Seraphi had believed that power came from perfection, from being born better than others, from never knowing weakness or struggle now. Watching her perfect warriors fail against imperfect humans, she began to wonder if she had been wrong all along. She closed the history files and stared out her window at the stars, somewhere out there. 800 humans were holding back an empire, and she had no idea how to stop them. The announcement shook the empire to its core. Queen Seraphi, the eternal ruler of 400 star systems, was going to war. No one could remember the last time a Velanthi monarch had left the throne world for battle. Some said it had never happened. The queen's place was on her diamond throne, commanding from afar. Untouchable and eternal, but these were not normal times. I will end this myself, she declared to her stunned court. I will bring my personal armada and the throne guard. I will show these humans what true power looks like, and I will accept their surrender with my own hands. The throne guard consisted of 1,000 warriors, each one a perfect specimen of Velanthi evolution. They had trained for centuries. They had never lost a single member in combat. They were, without question, the deadliest fighting force in the known galaxy. The Queen's armada numbered 50 warships, each one larger and more powerful than anything in the 3rd Legion's fleet. When they entered the Proxima system, the human colony's sensors detected them immediately. Commander Okonkwo stood in her command center, studying the readings. Her forces had been reduced to fewer than 300 soldiers. They had held for nearly 4 months, but the cost had been terrible. She was exhausted. Her people were exhausted. And now, 50 enemy warships were descending toward their world. Ma'am, her lieutenant said quietly, what do we do? Okonkwo was silent for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Send a message to Earth Command, she said. Tell them, the Queen has taken the bait. Begin Operation Prometheus. The Queen's ships landed in perfect formation around the colony. The throne guard deployed in ranks of gleaming silver and gold. Queen Seraphi herself descended from her flagship, wearing armor that had not seen battle in 1,000 years. She was beautiful and terrible, ancient and powerful. Every inch, the ruler of an interstellar empire, Colonel Marcus Webb, was waiting for her. He stood alone in the open space between the armies, his gray uniform dusty and worn. He looked older than when she had. Seen him in her throne room, thinner. There were new scars on his face and a new weariness in his eyes, but those eyes still did not look down. Queen Seraphi, he said with a small nod, you came yourself. My people will be honored. The Queen stopped several yards away from him. Up close, The difference between them was almost absurd. She towered over him, radiant with power. He was just a tired old man who could barely stand straight. "I am here to accept your surrender," she said coldly. "Your colony is finished. Your soldiers are broken. You have fought well, human, better than I ever expected. But this is the end. Kneel before me, and I will show mercy to your people." Webb considered this for a moment. Then he laughed. It was a quiet, gentle laugh with no mockery in it. "Just genuine amusement. You still don't understand us, do you?" he said. "After all this time? After all the reports and studies and battles, you still think this is about winning?" The Queen's eyes narrowed. "Explain yourself." "We were never trying to win," Webb said simply. "Not here. Not against your empire. We knew we couldn't beat you in a straight fight. We're too small, too weak, too primitive." He shrugged. "So we didn't try to win. We tried to survive long enough for our real plan to work." Something cold touched the Queen's heart. "What plan?" Before Webb could answer, the sky lit up. Ships emerged from hyperspace all around the planet. Not Valenthi ships. Human ships. Hundreds of them. They came from every direction, filling the sensors with so many signatures that the displays could barely track them all. The Queen stared upward in disbelief. "Impossible. You have no fleet. Our intelligence confirmed, your intelligence confirmed, that Earth's main fleet was destroyed in the first week of the war." "That was true. But Earth is not alone anymore, Your Majesty. We have 12 colony worlds, and every single one of them has been building ships and training soldiers since the day your first fleet arrived here." The Queen's mind raced. 12 colony worlds. Ships being built in secret. Soldiers being trained while her forces were trapped fighting for a single worthless rock. "You used this colony as bait," she breathed. "We used this colony as a timer," Webb corrected. "We needed 4 months to prepare. You gave us 4 months by being too proud to retreat, too stubborn to negotiate, too confident to call for reinforcements." He smiled sadly. "We learned from the best teachers, Your Majesty. The ones who kept sending more soldiers into a fight they should have abandoned." The Queen turned to her generals. "Order our ships to engage. Destroy their fleet." But her flagship's commander was already reporting in, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "My Queen, we are outnumbered 8-1. Their ships are not as advanced as ours, but there are too many. If we engage, we will be destroyed, and call for reinforcements from the throne world. That would take 3 weeks, my Queen. We do not have 3 weeks." Queen Seraphi stood frozen. For 3,000 years, she had never known this feeling, this helplessness, this complete and utter loss of control. A soft voice came from behind her. She turned to see Commander Okonkwo approaching, escorted by human soldiers. The woman was wounded, bleeding from a cut on her forehead, limping badly. But she walked with her head high. "Still don't understand," Okonkwo said. "You think in terms of battles. We think in terms of wars. You plan for days. We plan for decades. You fight until you win or die. We fight until we find a way to change the rules." She stopped directly in front of the Queen, this small, broken woman facing the eternal ruler of an empire. "You have 1,000 of your best warriors here. We have 300 tired soldiers. In a fair fight, you would destroy us in minutes." Okonkwo's eyes met the Queen's without flinching. "But humans never fight fair. We fight smart. We fight dirty. We fight like our survival depends on it, because it always does." She gestured at the sky full of human ships. "So here is what is going to happen, Your Majesty. You are going to order your ground forces to stand down. You are going to return to your ships. And you are going to leave this system. Because if you don't, we will destroy your fleet, capture your throne guard, and take you prisoner. And then we will have the eternal Queen as a hostage." The Queen's hands trembled with rage. "You would not dare." "We have spent 4 months dying for this colony," Okonkwo said quietly. "We have sacrificed everything. We have buried friends and family in this rocky soil. We have nothing left to lose and everything to gain." She leaned closer. "So yes, Your Majesty, we would absolutely dare." For a long, terrible moment, No one moved. No one spoke. Then Queen Sci-Fi the Eternal did something she had never done in 3,000 years of rule. She gave the order to retreat. 1 year had passed since the Battle of Proxima Centauri B1. Years since Queen Sci-Fi had given the order? That shocked her empire. 1 year since the Volanthi had retreated from a battlefield for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy had changed. News of the human victory spread through every corner of known space. Species that had lived in fear of Volanthi conquest suddenly saw hope. The Eternal Empire was not invincible. The perfect warriors could be beaten. A small, fragile species from an unremarkable planet had proven it. The Volanthi Empire did not collapse. It did not crumble into chaos or civil war, but it was wounded in ways that went deeper than lost soldiers or damaged ships. Its pride was broken. Its certainty was shattered. For the first time in millennia, the Volanthi were forced to look at themselves and ask uncomfortable questions. Queen Sci-Fi spent that year doing a great deal of thinking. She studied human history until she knew it better than most humans. She watched recordings of the battle on Proxima Centauri B hundreds of times, analyzing every moment, trying to understand what she had missed. She interviewed Volanthi survivors, including the captured Crimson Guard warriors, who had been returned as part of a prisoner exchange. What she learned changed her. The negotiations for a formal peace treaty took 6 months. They were held on a neutral space station called Concordance Prime, far from both human and Volanthi territory. Diplomats from both sides argued and debated and bargained. Terms were proposed and rejected and revised. In the end, the treaty recognized human territorial sovereignty. It established clear borders between the two civilizations. It created rules for trade and communication and peaceful interaction. And most importantly, it declared that humans and Volanthi would relate to each other as equals. Equals, the word stuck in the throats of many Volanthi nobles. How could these small, short-lived, fragile creatures be equal to the eternal masters of 400 star systems? But the Queen had signed the treaty, and her word was law. On the day of the formal signing ceremony, Queen Sci-Fi made an unusual request. She asked for a private audience with Colonel Marcus Webb and Commander Zara Okonkwo. No guards, no advisors. Just the three of them in a small room aboard the station. The humans agreed. When the door closed behind them, the Queen stood in silence for a long moment. She looked at these two humans who had caused her so much trouble. Webb was using a cane now, his old injuries finally catching up with him. Okonkwo had a new scar across her cheek and walked with a mechanical brace on her left leg. They were broken, these humans. Damaged, worn down by time and war and loss, but they stood before her without fear, just as they always had. "I have a question," the Queen said finally. "One that has haunted me for a year. I need to understand the answer before I can truly make peace with your people." Webb nodded slowly. "Ask." The Queen took a deep breath. "How? You are small. You are weak. Your lives last barely a century. You have no psychic powers, no genetic enhancements, no natural advantages of any kind. By every measure that matters, you should have lost. You should have been conquered like every other species we have faced." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "How do you persist?" The two humans exchanged a glance. Then Webb smiled and rolled up his sleeve. His forearm was covered in scars, some old and faded, some newer. "You see this?" He pointed to a thin line near his elbow. "I got this when I was 12 years old. Fell off a bicycle while learning to ride. Hit the ground hard. Scraped myself up pretty badly." He chuckled at the memory. "I fell down 30 times that day. Got up 31. The Queen frowned. "I do not understand. What does a childhood injury have to do with war?" "Everything," Okonkwo said. She stepped forward, her mechanical leg clicking softly against the floor. "Your Majesty, your people are born perfect. You emerge from your birthing chambers strong and smart and ready to conquer. You never struggle to take your first steps. You never fail at basic tasks. You never know what it feels like to be helpless. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Humans are born completely helpless. We cannot walk for a year. We cannot feed ourselves for longer. We spend the first decade of our lives falling down and getting up, failing and trying again, learning that pain is not the end of the world. By the time we are adults, we have fallen thousands of times, and every single time, we have gotten back up. The Queen was silent, listening. You called us weak because we feel pain, Okonkwo continued. But pain is our teacher. You called us primitive because we struggle, but struggle is our forge. Everything we are, everything we have built, everything we have achieved, we earned through effort and failure and persistence. We did not conquer our challenges through perfection. We conquered them through stubbornness. Webb nodded. Your people have never known failure, Your Majesty, so you never learned how to recover from it. You never developed the muscles that come from picking yourself up off the ground. When you finally met an enemy you could not easily defeat, you did not know what to do. But we know, Okonkwo said softly. We have been doing it our whole lives, our whole history. Getting knocked down and standing back up, again and again and again, until we find a way to win, or we die trying. The Queen stood motionless as the truth of their words settled into her ancient mind. She thought about her own people, so perfect and powerful and utterly unprepared for adversity. She thought about the stagnation she had sensed in her empire for centuries, the creeping boredom, the lack of growth or change or improvement. They had become too perfect to evolve. Slowly, carefully, Queen Seraphie, the Eternal, bowed her head. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable. But for a being who had never lowered her gaze to anyone in 3,000 years, it meant everything. I ridiculed you because I did not understand you, she said quietly. I called you weak because you feel pain. But pain taught you persistence. Failure taught you adaptation. Fear taught you courage. She raised her head and met their eyes. My people have grown stagnant in our perfection. Perhaps we have something to learn from imperfection. The signing ceremony went smoothly. Treaties were exchanged. Hands were shaken. A new era began. 5 years later, the first joint Velanthi Human Training Academy opened on a neutral world. Young Velanthi warriors stood alongside human soldiers, learning new tactics and strategies. More importantly, they learned something their empire had forgotten how to feel. The pride of earning victory through struggle. Queen Seraphie attended the first graduation ceremony. She watched as cadets from both species marched in formation, united by purpose, if not by blood. Near the end of the procession, a young human cadet stumbled and nearly fell, a Velanthi warrior. Walking beside her immediately reached down to help her up. The Queen smiled. It was a strange expression on her ancient face, one she had learned from spending time among humans, but it felt right that night in her private journal. She wrote words that would eventually become famous throughout the galaxy. I sought to conquer a species, and instead discovered a truth. The measure of a people is not in their power, but in their capacity to rise. Strength is not born from perfection. It is forged in the fire of failure and tempered by the choice to continue. And humans? Humans never stop rising. They fall 1,000 times and stand 1,001. This is their gift. This is their power. And this is what we must learn from them if we wish to remain worthy of the stars we rule. She set down her pen and looked out the window at the distant lights of the academy. Somewhere down there, a Velanthi warrior was learning how to fail. And somewhere, a human soldier was teaching them how to get back up. The galaxy would never be the same. The Velanthi fought back with their psychic abilities. They reached out with their minds to locate human soldiers, but the planet's electromagnetic storms disrupted their mental links. Thoughts became fuzzy. Communication broke down. Warriors who had always fought as one perfect unit suddenly found themselves alone and confused, and the humans kept attacking. They did not fight like any enemy the Velanthi had faced before. They retreated when pressed, then attacked from new directions. They set traps, then waited patiently for hours until the perfect moment. They fought in shifts, resting and returning fresh while the Velanthi grew tired. This concept baffled the aliens. Volanthi warriors fought until victory or death. The idea of retreating to rest, of cycling soldiers in and out of combat, seemed like cowardice. But as days turned into weeks, the wisdom of the human approach became clear. Volanthi warriors were stronger, but they were also exhausted. Human soldiers were weaker, but there was always a fresh squad ready to fight. General Korvax sent a message to Queen Seraphi after 3 weeks of fighting. His voice was confused and frustrated. "My queen, I do not understand these creatures. They retreat, then attack. They show weakness, then reveal strength. They fight without honor, without formation, without any rules we recognize. We have taken the colony's outer districts, but the cost has been severe. Nearly 2,000 warriors have fallen." The queen received this message in her throne room. For the first time in centuries, she did not laugh at news of humans. 2,000 Volanthi warriors dead against a force of 800 humans. It seemed impossible. "Continue the assault," she ordered. "Crush them completely." Back on Proxima Centauri B, the Volanthi pushed deeper into the colony. They took street after street, building after building. Each victory came at a terrible price, but they were winning. Slowly, surely, they were winning. Then they reached the residential district. Korvax walked through the empty homes of human families. He saw small beds in small rooms. He saw drawings on walls made by children, pictures of families and pets and bright yellow suns. He saw books with simple words meant to teach young ones how to read. He saw photographs of smiling faces. He stopped before one image. It showed a human family, a mother, a father, 2 small children, standing in front of this very colony. They looked happy. For the first time, Korvax understood something important. The humans were not fighting for territory. They were not fighting for resources or pride. They were fighting for home, for family, for the right to live in this harsh place they had worked so hard to build. He thought of his own people's conquests. The Volanthi took worlds because they could, because expansion was their nature. They never asked what the conquered peoples lost. A human voice crackled over a captured radio. Korvax recognized it as the female commander who led the defense. "No. This is Commander Okonkwo to all Volanthi forces. You have taken our streets. Congratulations. But you should know something. We were born on a world that tried to kill us every day. Storms, predators, disease, cold. We survived all of it. We built cities. We crossed oceans. We reached for the stars. And we did it by being too stubborn to know when to quit." There was a pause. Then her voice continued. "Harder now. You have taken our streets. But you will pay for every room, every hallway, every inch. This is not a battle anymore. This is our home, and you will never understand what humans will do to protect their homes." The radio went silent. Korvax stood among the children's drawings and family photographs. He looked at his tired, wounded soldiers. He thought about the long weeks still ahead. For the first time in his 400 years of life, he felt something strange in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was doubt. 3 months had passed since the Volanthi fleet first arrived at Proxima Centauri B. 3 months of blood and fire and death. The siege that was supposed to last 3 hours had become a nightmare without end. Queen Seraphi sat alone in her private chambers, reading reports that made her ancient heart grow cold. Nearly 4,000 warriors lost. The colony still held. Human resistance had not weakened. If anything, it had grown stronger. She made a decision that surprised her entire court. "Send the Crimson Guard," she commanded, "and prepare the psychics for a full mental assault." The Crimson Guard were the elite of the elite. Warriors who had never known defeat in 10,000 years. And the psychic assault was a weapon that had broken entire civilizations. The Volanthi could reach into enemy minds and fill them with despair, so deep that soldiers simply gave up the will to live. This was no longer about conquest. This was about pride. These humans had embarrassed the Eternal Empire. They would pay. The Crimson Guard arrived on Proxima Centauri B like demons descending from the sky. Their armor was red as blood, their weapons hummed with deadly energy. Behind them came the Psychic Masters, their minds linked together into a single terrible weapon. Commander Okonkwo felt them coming before she saw them. A pressure built in her skull, a whisper of darkness at the edge of her thoughts. She had heard stories about Valenthia mental attacks. She had trained her soldiers as best she could, but nothing could truly prepare them for what was coming. All units, she broadcast to her remaining forces. The psychic attack is beginning. Remember your training. Remember why we fight. Remember who we are. The Valanthi psychics unleashed their assault. Waves of pure despair crashed over the human defenders. Soldiers saw visions of their own deaths. They felt hopelessness so heavy it pressed them to the ground. They heard voices telling them to give up, to surrender, to stop fighting a battle they could never win. Men and women collapsed throughout the colony. Some screamed. Some simply fell silent, staring at nothing. Private James Chen was 23 years old. He lay on the cold ground of his position, tears streaming down his face. The voices in his head told him he was worthless. They told him his family was dead. They told him nothing mattered and nothing ever would. He thought about his mother back on Earth. He thought about her smile, her laugh, the way she hugged him before he shipped out. He thought about her voice saying, "Come home safe, Jimmy. Come home to me." He forced himself to his knees. The voices screamed at him to stay down. The despair pushed against him like a physical weight. Every cell in his body wanted to quit. But his mother was waiting. He stood up. He raised his weapon. He started fighting again. Across the colony, similar scenes played out. Human soldiers fell to the psychic assault. Then one by one, they got back up. They thought of families. They thought of friends. They thought of promises they had made and dreams they still held. They fought against the darkness inside their own minds. They won. The Valanthi psychics recoiled in shock. A young psychic named Virith had been part of the assault. He had touched thousands of enemy minds in his career and broken all of them. Human minds were supposed to be weak, undisciplined, easy to crush. But these minds were different. They were chaotic, yes. Messy and loud and full of conflicting emotions, but they were also incredibly strong. Virith felt memories flash through him from the humans he attacked. A woman who had lost her legs in an accident and spent 2 years learning to walk again. A man who had watched his father die of disease and then dedicated his life to medicine. A young soldier who had been told she would never amount to anything, and now led a squad of defenders. Every human carried scars. Every human had suffered. But instead of breaking them, the suffering had made them stronger. They had turned their pain into fuel. They had built walls inside their minds, not through training, but through living. Virith disconnected from the assault. His hands were shaking. "What is wrong?" His master demanded. "They are not fearless," Virith said slowly. "They are filled with fear. More fear than any species I have touched. But they fight anyway. They feel the despair we send them, and they choose to keep going." He looked up at his master with something like awe in his eyes. "They have turned suffering into strength. I do not know how to break that." The psychic assault continued for hours. Some humans fell and did not rise, but most survived. Most kept fighting. And when the Crimson Guard finally advanced, they met resistance just as fierce as before. The first Crimson Guard warrior was captured alive that day. His name was Verkith, and he was 700 years old. He had never been defeated in battle. When the humans surrounded him and demanded his surrender, he expected torture. He expected cruelty. He expected the savagery that the Valanthi showed to their own prisoners. Instead, the humans took him to a medical station. They treated his wounds. They gave him food and water. They asked him questions politely and accepted when he refused to answer. This disturbed him more than any torture could have. Back on the Valanthi throne world, Queen Sci-Fi received Virith's report about the psychic assault. She read it 3 times. Then she did something she had never done before. She began studying human history. She read about their plagues that killed millions, but somehow made them develop better medicine. She read about their wars that destroyed cities, but somehow led to peace movements. She read about climate collapse that threatened their entire species, but somehow inspired them to change their ways. Every disaster that should have ended them instead made them evolve. Every tragedy was transformed into progress. They did not.